Haftarah. He says the Haftarah Parsha Shemeni describes the return from the Aron from captivity. So when we begin to read, we see the Aron being brought back, and this is the famous story where even Uzzah reaches out to try to put it back, and he dies. And he says that the Aron came from captivity, and the celebrations that accompanied its journey to Jerusalem, King David participated with unbridled joy, as described in the verse in 2 Samuel 6:14. David danced with all his strength before Hashem. It's chapter 6, verse 14. And it says here that Michal, King David's wife, and the daughter of King Shaul thought his behavior was unbecoming the honor of the king, and she berated him for this. Okay, and Zerah Shimshon, he discusses Michal's rebuke and David's response. And Michal, the daughter of Shaul, went to meet David and said, "How honored was the king of Israel today, who was exposed today in the presence of his servants, maidservants, as one of the boors would be exposed." Like she's calling him a fool almost. And it says, "Vayomer David el Michal lefnei Hashem asher bachar bi me'achvich u'Michal beso." David answered Michal in the presence of Hashem, "Who chose me over your father and over his entire house to appoint me as ruler over the people of Hashem, over Israel? Before Hashem I shall rejoice." And it says, and I shall even, and this is what he says, "And I shall be even more humble than this, and I shall be lowly in my eyes." That's in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 20 to 22. Okay. And according to the sages in the Midrash, when David said, "Hashem who chose me over your father and over his entire house," he says he was really saying, "Hashem who chose me and rejected your father's house." Ad Khan Lashon, no, the Midrash ends here. And he says, this is a kasha, though, this is a difficult to understand. What was the need for David to humiliate Michal by saying that Hashem rejected her father's house, when after all her intentions were good? See, Michal was actually trying to say, like, why are you dancing so foolishly as a king? A king should be always in looking authoritative and presentable. So Michal was actually right by saying this, and her intentions were good. The Gemara teaches that if a king renounces his honor is not renounced. And by dancing in a way that was unbecoming of David, David was relinquishing the honor due to his royalty, and Michal rightfully intended to uphold the king's honor. So what was the justification of David's derisive reply? And it says, V'od maratza lamar. Furthermore, what did David mean when he said, "And I shall even be more humble than this, and I shall be lowly in my eyes"? What did he mean by the words "even more"? In what way was he even more humble than this? And the Zerah Shimshon, he continues and he says, our sages taught, and this is in Masechet Yoma 22b, why did the reign of the house of Shaul endure? Because there was no flaw in his lineage. And that was why it did not endure. And the sages also said in support of this explanation that there is a general principle that we do not appoint someone as a leader over the community unless he has blemishes in his genealogy. Now, you know how amazing that is? Because what is the most talked about thing in the Brit Hadashah? What is the biggest rejection of the Brit Hadashah? One of the most biggest arguments against the Brit Hadashah is the genealogy, of Yeshua. Corrupted his line is. You know, the anti-missionaries use this. And this is just mind-blowing that the Zereshim Shon, it points out that the sages say, I mean, we even hear rabbis today that the Mashiach is going to come from a pure line and be like a king and all of these things. But that's not entirely the case, as this rule is even known. We see this even with through King David, whose grandmother was Rus, and came through Lot and incest and all of these things, right? So a crazy connection, then I don't know what is. But here we see that David therefore said to Michal, I am lowly by my own poor value, as I have a blemished genealogy. It is for this reason that Hashem chose me and rejected the house of your father Shaul, because your father had no genealogical flaw. Accordingly, I must lower myself in the presence of Hashem, because in truth, I am even more humble than this, meaning I am inherently even lowlier than this behavior that you disapprove of, for I have a blemished genealogy. So David was not embarrassing Michal by saying that Hashem had rejected her father's household. Rather, he was justifying his behavior by telling her that it was proper for him to act in this undignified manner for the very reason that her father's house was rejected by Hashem. You know, we read in Shabbat on Psalm 34 that it says David disguised himself before Abimelech, like he made himself look crazy, right? Well, there's also this concept that where is it here? That even the sages say, this is what is from Breslov. It says here, and actually the Rebbe Nachman's stories, it says, when Mashiach first appears, he will not be accepted by all. Many will cast doubts upon him because he won't be what they expected. Some will deride him and say that he is deranged, all because it's not the way they would have arranged. You know, what's interesting is also when you go into the Basora in the Gospels here, we have the Pershim say this about Mashiach. It says that him and the disciples came to the house in Mark chapter 3, and once more a crowd of people gathered together to the point where they were not even able to eat bread. His relatives heard about this and they went to take hold of him. And for they said, he's out of his mind. He's deranged. And the scholars who had come down from Jerusalem said, Baal Zavul is in him. And he drives out demons through the prince of demons. You see, the Pershim say the same thing that Rebbe Nachman would say about the Mashiach, that they would think he's deranged and crazy. And we see that David acts in this behavior as well. But this is one of the characteristics, one of the secrets of Mashiach. And he goes on and he says an alternative explanation is that Michal's intent in berating David for his behavior was actually for his benefit, for she knew that her father's house had lost the right to keep the royal dynasty because Shaul renounced his honor. So now when she saw David renouncing his honor by behaving dishonorably, she warned him that so that he should not also lose the monarchy, as happened to her father. Therefore, David was compelled to explain to her the difference between the renunciation of his honor and Shaul's renunciation of his honor. And thus, David was not the one who brought up Hashem's rejection of Shaul's house. He was merely responding to Michal's concern and mentioned the rejection of Shaul only to make a distinction between Shaul and his action and his own. And so, again, he finishes off like this, and he says, for Shaul renounced his honor to the people who were debasing his honor. It was wrong for him to do so, because upholding the honor of the king is in effect upholding the honor of HaKodesh Baruch Hu, who commanded us in his Torah, you shall absolutely appoint a king over you, which implies the awe of the king is to be upon you and precludes this renunciation of the king's honor. By renouncing his honor, Shaul committed a dishonor to Hashem, who willed the awe of a king constantly to be upon the people. However, here in the case of David, he renounced his honor not in deference to the people, but for the honor of the divine presence. And the sages say that in regard to King Agrippas, that a mitzvah is different. The king may renounce his honor in deference to a mitzvah. And Tosafos writes there that when a king renounces his honor in deference to the honor of a mitzvah or the honor of the Torah, it is an honor to the divine presence. As the mortal king who himself commands the awe of the people demonstrates that the awe of the divine presence is upon him, and he is prepared to fulfill the commandment of the king of the worlds. Even by doing so, he will be giving up his own honor. And Tosafos goes more on that. And Rambam similarly compares the reverence given to the king with the king's humility before Hashem, as he wrote in Hilchos Melachim, the same way the Torah granted the king great honor, all are obligated to honor him, so too he was commanded to be lowly in his heart. That's where Shaul's renunciation of his honor was wrong. It was a dishonor to Hashem. David's renunciation of his honor actually demonstrated his reverence of Hashem as he lowered himself to honor the Torah, and he was therefore correct in doing so. So this was David's response to Michal, as the verse states, "Before Hashem shall I rejoice, even if it's unbecoming of king, so that I shall be lowly in my eyes before Hashem." You know, this also reminds me of Yeshua. Yeshua, even though some may say, some may not, that he was a king himself, and he was in the presence of his Talmudim, and the Talmudim were arguing about being great, and Yeshua basically undressed himself to be more like suited like a slave, wearing nothing but a towel and washing his Talmudim's feet. And this is not even the characteristic of a king. And Yeshua did that. He humbled himself. And that's what reminds me. So that's what I thought was so fascinating about the Zera Shimshon. And I never, ever seen commentary or an explanation. We always, well, from what I've learned, we always thought Michal was the bad guy. How dare her talk bad to King David? But she was really saying, you're acting inappropriate. What is so bad about what Michal was doing? So really, the way the Zera Shimshon brings that out, I thought was fascinating, and as well that the king must come from a blemished line, which it just shows everything about the Brit Hadashah. You know. So I thought that was fascinating as well. Yeah.
Well, what I get a kick out of is when you think about it, back in the Torah, it even says, "My ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts." So when Yeshua, when he did his miracles, like putting mud in the eyes, and then you also got back in the Torah too, where one of the kings was told to go dip himself in one of the rivers. And he's like, well, why am I going to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that was something I thought was amazing. In Shemeni, Parsha Shemeni, there's 4 types of animals that are listed as unkosher in Vayikra 11. So why these 4 types of animals? Why specifically only those 4 types of animals? Right? Why didn't the Torah go into more detail about other animals that are unkosher? So why specifically these 4? So like, yeah, if you go to Vayikra chapter 11, verse, well, it starts in chapter 11. It says that Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, these creatures you may not, yet you may eat from, animals that are upon the earth, everything that animal that has a split hoof, which is completely separated into double hooves, and that brings up its cud. That one may be eat. But this you shall not eat from, those that bring up their cud or have a split hooves." So it mentions 4 specific animals: the camel, for it brings up its cud; but its hoof is not split. It's unclean to you. And the hyrax, for it brings up its cud, but its hoof is not split. It's unclean to you. The hare, the same thing. And the pig, for its hoof is split. And so it has a split hoof, but it does not chew its cud. So why specifically only these four animals? Right? Actually, I think the Kazam Cipher sheds light on this too. Let me open this up. Yeah, so what's interesting is the Kazam Cipher, he actually says that Chazal relate that in the future world known as Olam Hatikun, the prohibition of eating the chazir, which means pig, will no longer apply. In fact, the term chazir is related to chazar, which means to return. So the same letters of pig is return. And they say that implies the temporary prohibition. The words of the Midrash say that the chazir in Psalm 146 will eventually return to its previous state of being fit for consumption. Now, I wouldn't take that completely literal either. When the Midrash lends itself to different interpretations, this is particularly an allusion to imperial Rome, which is compared to a chazir, which we read in Psalm verse 80, verse 14. Actually, if you go to Psalm 80, verse 14, if you go to Tehillim, let me open it up here. I just gotta find it here in the Tanakh. Psalm, what I say, 80, chapter 80, verse 14. This is what it says. It says, even before that, it says in verse 13, why did you breach its wall so that every passerby plucks its fruit? Wild boars gnaw at it, and the creatures of the field feed on it. And I'm going to go to Psalm 146 for a second here. Psalm 146. Okay, never mind. So Psalm 80, it describes a boar. A boar will gnaw at it, and this is even describing, the sages say, Rome. And Rome. So what does it mean? And so the four non-kosher animals really relate to the four kingdoms of exile. This is what the Midrash says. And it says the Chazir will be the imperial Rome, which is compared to the Chazir, a pig, will be subjugated in Mashiach's time to Klal Israel. Nonetheless, the simple reading of the passage states clearly that the restriction of eating ma'achlot asurot will be removed. Forbidden foods will be removed, and la'atid lavo, forever. So one should not interpret this midrash as an indication that any of the mitzvot of the Torah will no longer apply in the Messianic era, but the chazir itself will change. It will change it. It will chew its cud. So it's got to do with Rome. What's interesting is that the Talmud says, and we're going to come into the next parsha of Tatzriah. What is Tatzriah about? It's about leprosy and skin inflictions, right? In Sanhedrin 98, it says the Mashiach is sitting at the gates and he's unwinding and winding up bandages for his leprosy, right? And then Rashi says in the footnotes that the Mashiach will be called the leprous scholar. And It says he's sitting at the gates, and the Vilna Gaon comments also in the footnotes that the gates are Rome. And so he's sitting at the gates of Rome, and this is the concept that Mashiach is actually hiding in Rome, and he's going to bring down the kingdom. So why is Rome described as a pig? Because the pig, it has split hooves. It looks kosher. From the outside, it looks kosher. Just like Christianity says, we have Messiah. We are obeying the Bible. We obey God. We love God. We love the Jewish people, but you don't need to keep the Torah no more. See, they on the outside it looks like they're kosher, but inside they are not keeping any of the commandments. They're not kosher. They pretend to look kosher, but they're really deceiving. And this is the characteristic of Rome. Rome will even invite and say, okay, we will help you. We're in Jerusalem, but we will allow you to study Torah. We will allow you to do this and that, but it's only for Rome's own benefit. It's not for the benefit of the Jewish people. And so Mashiach is going to bring down Rome. Yeah, you got even in Psalm 80, verse 14, it says the wild boar gnaws at it. And then the word in Hebrew is chazir miya'ar. And the ayin there is floating. It's floating above. It's not in the word, like it's floating above the word. We talked about the ayin and the secret of 70 and how it becomes detached. You see, Mashiach, he looks unkosher. He looks like he does not belong. He looks impure. He looks like he should be outside the gates, just like the leprous one is to be excommunicated. So is Mashiach. He's in exile. He's outside. He looks leprous. And even in the Haggadah, the Vilna Gaon says in the Gad Chadya, the last song after we finish the Seder, we sing, and he says even the it's a code for Mashiach ben Yosef, who actually dies, and so this is all interesting. And the Mashiach, he's outside the gates. He looks unkosher, but he's going to return. Chazar, he's going to return. Actually,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
Yeah. So
Well, exactly, because I think if I remember right, there's a suffering servant, which is what you're referring to, where he has to die and be resurrected. But then the second one is the conquering king or something like that. I can't remember offhand, but where he comes in and he takes over and puts everything in its place.
yeah, and that in Judaism we understand is the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef as the one that's suffering. Not that he's like the church just thinks that means son of Joseph, but it's not to be taken that literal. Mashiach ben Yosef is the aspect of what Yosef went through in the Torah. He is the exactly what Yosef did. He suffered. He went through sufferings. This is the aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef, is the one that's going to clear everything up.
Yeah.
And when you understand that, it'll help you understand more of what the sages are talking about in the concept of Mashiach.